It's an act of love to tell people this amazing news that Jesus brings us peace, a deep inner joy, fills our hearts with love, brings meaning and purpose to our lives, brings forgiveness, eternal life. It's natural to want to tell people we found Jesus.
And I think all of us can say, look, I don't know the answer to all your questions, but I can tell you, once I was blind, now I can see. Jesus has made a difference to my life. Every person can do that.
Hello and welcome to the Telling Others series. My name is Isaac Borkway, or you might know me as Guvna B, the rapper and author. You'll be pleased to know I'm not rapping today, but instead we've searched the globe and we're excited to share with you some amazing stories of people experiencing the power of Jesus through Alpha Online. Our hope is that you would be inspired and encouraged by these stories of transformation. In this introductory episode, I have the honor of interviewing Nicky Gumbel, the vicar of HTB in London and the pioneer of Alpha. We talk about the power of telling others your story, and we hear some of Nicky's own stories, including how he encountered Jesus, and we discuss the global impact of Alpha Online. Let's have a look. We're talking about the power of telling your story today, and I've heard that you have some fantastic stories of your own. A little bird told me that you have a pretty romantic story of how you proposed to your wife, Pippa. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of people, including myself, that could do with learning from a romantic guru such as yourself. So tell us how you did it.
I'm about, as you know, about the most unromantic. I would love to be romantic. I'm sure your proposal to Emma would have been totally cool and romantic. Mine was the opposite. It was very uncool and very unromantic. It was back in 1977, in end of August, and I had been on a holiday with Pippa's family in France, and Pippa's family had gone home, which left us there for one evening, and I went for a walk, and then I decided to propose. Literally, I decided that evening. I had no ring, nothing. I just thought, oh, maybe tonight would be a good night to pop the question. So, but I was a bit worried that she might say no. I didn't know whether she would want to marry me, and I was a bit frightened of rejection as well. So I thought I'd sort of ask it in stages. So the first question I asked her was, would you ever like to get married? And she said, yes. So I then said, who would you most like to marry? And she said, Prince Charles. Bear in mind, this is 1977, so it is 44 years ago. So he would have been about in his 20s. So it was a bit more believable. It was slightly different, yes. So then I her having declared that she'd most like to marry, I asked her, who would she most like to marry? She said, Prince Charles. So I then said, well, would you marry me? And she said, yes, thankfully. But as you can see, it was a hopeless way to propose. We then went home to my parents' house, where my mother produced a box of old broken rings and asked her to choose one of them. So she chose a broken ring, which was our engagement ring.
Your walks seem quite scary. When I go on a walk, I think about what I'm having for dinner, but you obviously think about much bigger stuff than that. But that's really inspiring. You went for it. And when I see Pippa next time, I'm going to ask her, if you could go back in time, would you marry Prince Charles or Nicky Gumbel? And I'll let you know. Now, I know you've got some friends in some very high places. You mentioned royalty there, and I understand that you've also met Queen Elizabeth II. Now, I definitely haven't got her number in my phone book, so tell us a little bit about that day.
Well, I got this invitation that I thought it was a joke, actually. That the Queen had asked me to lunch, and I literally thought it was a joke. But then I got sent the sort of there were 8 people on the list for lunch with the Queen at Buckingham Palace. I don't know when this was, a few years ago. Anyway, I arrived at Buckingham Palace on my bike, because that's the only way I ever travel around London. The policeman at the gate looked a little bit surprised to see one of the guests of the Queen's lunch arriving on a rather battered old bike, but he kindly took my bike and looked after it. And then I looked at the seating plan, and I saw I'd been put next to the Queen, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!" We had an amazing lunch, and what she does is she turns. When she turns, everyone turns. So Prince Philip was off. I think there were 8 of us, including the Queen and Prince Philip, so the first half she talked to the person on her right, and then she turned halfway through and started talking to me. So it's and the pudding had arrived, which just looked amazing pudding. But I didn't, I didn't know what to do, because I didn't want to have a mouthful, because you're not supposed to ask her a question, so you have to wait for her to ask a question. So I didn't want, just after her question, to have a mouthful of chocolate mousse or whatever it was. So I didn't. I left. She said, "Don't you like the pudding?" I said, "Yes." I didn't like to confess. It's because I was so overawed sitting next to the Queen. Anyway, she is so impressive. I mean, oh my goodness. She's now 95, is she? Still growing strong. I just have so much admiration. I could not believe the privilege of and I still have no idea. I think it was some mistake that they invited me in the first place, let alone put me next to her. But it was a mistake that I hugely, hugely enjoyed and felt deeply honoured.
Well, next time you get invited, I'll give you a lift, because you can't be pulling up the Buckingham Palace. You are known as Mr. Alpha. So I'm sure it wasn't a mistake that you were invited. But before you became Mr. Alpha, you read law at Cambridge and theology at Oxford. But then I read you changed career paths and became a barrister. So tell us about your love for coffee and why you decided to go down that route.
Yeah, it's easily misunderstood. I think I would have been a much better. Well, I don't know whether I'd have been a very good barrister. I don't think I would have. My son-in-law is a very good barrister, so I did almost 10 years of law altogether, which I loved. Actually, being a barrister is an enormous fun job in a way. I mean, it's such an amazing. Just you see so many different aspects of life. I mean, I did a mixture of. I started with tax, and then I did crime, and that's a fascinating world actually to see. And that was the first time that I went into the prisons was as a barrister, and that was part of it. You're going into the prison and defending people, prosecuting people, and seeing the need really. But a need that you could only meet in a very superficial way. Maybe you could defend someone or you could prosecute them, but what happened to them then? What if they were convicted? If you were prosecuting and they were convicted, there was a certain level of satisfaction, but also, actually, is this the answer? Is this going to really help them or anyone? Is there's a deeper need in that person? Or if you defended them and they were acquitted, I mean, even if you were successful in the case and the person walks free, what are they going to do? And it made me, I had a longing to meet a deeper need, I guess. And so now I have the huge privilege of going into the prisons to bring the message of Jesus, bring hope and life transformation that can make a much longer difference in their life, eternal difference.
That's great. And when it comes to personal stories of faith, which may be a bit different to the stories that you might have heard as a barrister, I've heard you talk about how irritated you once would get when Christians would talk about their faith. You said you couldn't understand why they just couldn't keep it to themselves.
Yeah.
What is it about telling others your personal experience with Jesus that is so powerful?
Yeah, I think, before I was a Christian, I thought, why can't they, I'm an atheist, but I don't spend my whole life trying to convert people to atheism. Why do they want to convert me to Christianity? And but it was only when I experienced an encounter with Jesus that I realized why they did it. Because once you have encountered Jesus, you do want other people to know, because it is so life-changing. When you experience a relationship with Jesus, you find a purpose, you find that you're loved, you find a joy, you find a peace. You want, hey guys, this is amazing. So I think it's a natural thing that to want to tell people.
Yeah. A wise man once told me, you can argue with someone's opinion, but you can't argue with their story.
Yeah.
That wise man was Nicky Gumbel, actually.
Well,
tell us more about...
Well, that's true, isn't it? I always say to people, the blind man, when Jesus healed the blind man, a man has been born blind. In John chapter 9, you read the story, that the guy has been born blind and Jesus heals him. And the Pharisees keep asking him all these questions and saying, oh, did he really do it? Is this the same guy? And what happened? And how can a sinner bring healing? And he just goes, look, I don't know the answer to all your questions, but one thing I do know, once I was blind and now I can see. And I think and there's no answer to that. What could they say to that? No, you're not. You can't see. You weren't blind. It's like, and I think all of us can say, look, I don't know the answer to all your questions, but I can tell you, once I was blind, now I can see. Jesus has made a difference to my life. And every person can do that.
Tell me more about what it is that inspires you about Apostle Paul's conversion story told in the New Testament book of Acts.
I think it's 3 times Paul tells his story in the book of Acts. And basically, I mean, every opportunity he gets, he tells his story. Because, as you say, there's no answer to someone's testimony, to their story. You can't deny that it happened to them. But I think it's the way he tells it that I think is a very good model for all of us. Basically, it's in 3 parts. It's before, what happened, and the difference. So each time he starts off by saying, I used to go around persecuting Christians. I would imprison them. And then I was on the road to Damascus and this bright light shone and I was blinded by it. And then I encountered Jesus. And now here I am telling you that Jesus really is alive. The resurrection did happen. It's real. I'm preaching the gospel. And I think that's a good pattern when you're telling people your story. First, to identify, because in telling what the before bit, you are identifying with your hearer. So if you're talking to someone who's not a Christian and you say, 6 months ago, I was an atheist. So you identify with where they are and then tell your story, whatever happened to you. And that's in your own words. And then to describe the difference Jesus has made for you in a way that people will say, wow, that's amazing. But using your own words, not, we never suggest to anyone what they should say. But I think it's quite wise to follow. Well, it's a good example, good model to follow, the sort of before, what happened, and the difference Jesus has made.
Some might find this hard to believe, but there was a time where you didn't know and followed Jesus. Can you tell me a little bit about what life was like before you met Jesus? Because in my mind, I can imagine you were in the middle of the dance floor, showcasing your dance moves. Feel free to give us a little teaser if you want. But what was life like before you followed Jesus?
My father was an agnostic, and my mother was not a churchgoer, so I didn't grow up with any faith. But when I left school, it was a very sort of much a party. I was making the most of the friends I'd made at school and some of the friends I met who were very kind of a nightclub scene, and I was a member of a nightclub in the King's Road where we went every night, and that was kind of what I thought life was about. It was like just party, and my sort of I was a night person rather than a day person. I was like 5 o'clock in the morning was the time I went to bed, and it was a pretty superficial existence, really. But at one level, I was perfectly happy. You know, I was in my first year at university, although I was kind of commuting to London for the parties. I wasn't consciously searching for anything. So it was the fact that my best friends, Nikki and Scylla Lee, as they now are, told me that they'd become Christians, that made me read the New Testament. But it really was the reading the New Testament that changed my life.
So tell us a little bit about what happened after you read the New Testament. What do you remember life being like after you met Jesus?
Reading the New Testament, it was as if the person I was reading about emerged from the page. That's the only way I can describe it. And I had this encounter. I knew it was true. And I knew at the same time that this was the purpose of life, was to know, was about Jesus, and about a relationship with God through Jesus, and experiencing the difference, I guess, the Holy Spirit makes to our lives when Jesus comes into our heart. It was this wanting everyone to know. That was the and not being able to understand really why. I couldn't understand why all the friends I'd had, because we'd had a few kind of discussions there'd been the Christians had sort of tried to convert us, and I'd always been the one like who was like the argumentative atheist who always presented, I thought, you know, these logical arguments why there could not be a God and why it was all a load of rubbish, and always encouraging people not to get involved. It was dangerous nonsense. And so I thought, when I told all these people, actually, no, I was wrong. It's true. They'd all go, oh, okay. But of course, it wasn't like that. You know, it wasn't. But it was an extraordinary time where quite a few of our friends did encounter Jesus, and some of you are still our very good friends, can relate to that time, or indeed even that week. I suppose looking back on it, it was an extraordinary work of the Holy Spirit, who was something happened. And although not everybody did, and I'm sure we put off a lot of people, I'm sure I personally must have put off loads of people, but nevertheless, some people are still following Jesus.
That's good to know. And if you're watching this and your name is Nikki, we'll let you know where you can hand in your application to join the Nikki Club. What have been some of the most impacting or memorable stories you've heard of people encountering Jesus through Alpha?
Oh, we've been so privileged because we've traveled the world, and we've done conferences in every country, not every country in the world, but many, many countries. And what we used to do at those conferences is we used to say, if any of you have encountered Jesus on Alpha, I would love to meet you in the coffee break. And 100 people would turn up, and then we'd hear the stories, and then I would interview them. Often I would interview 25 people in one evening. They'd each speak for 30 seconds, and we would just hear story after story after story, whether it was in Korea or Singapore or Zimbabwe or Kenya or some city in the US or some European country. And it was just so humbling to hear these stories of people encountering Jesus, people being set free from drug addiction, alcohol addiction, people who've been in prison. I always think of one of the stories that's in the Alpha film series of Shane Taylor, who was one of the most dangerous people in the entire prison system. And the fact that this guy who was so dangerous and so feared, is now this lovely, warm, peace-loving father of 5 children. How this man who was so hard that people were terrified of him, now whenever he tells his story, he can't do it without tears in his eyes, and just such a godly, gracious man. You think, this is extraordinary. I mean, this is like the Apostle Paul's conversion story. I used to go around, doing these horrific things, and now here I am. And he goes into the prisons and he tells people about Jesus, and his story has such an impact.
That's so incredible to hear. And we're in an interesting time, let's say. The current digital revolution is meaning more and more people are hearing about and encountering Jesus. In fact, I heard a recent figure that 11,000 churches in 101 countries tried Alpha Online in 2020, which is amazing to hear.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about Alpha Online that has seen this level of global reach?
I think it's much easier for people to do Alpha Online than in person, because there's so many barriers to doing it in person. Most courses run either in a home or in a church building. And if you think of the barriers to going into someone's home that you don't know, or into a church, they're huge barriers if you're not used to church. And what we're finding is far more people are coming online, and they don't have to overcome those barriers. So there's a much higher number of people doing Alpha, and many more of those doing Alpha are people totally outside the church. So in the past, quite a few of the people who came would have had some church background, maybe even nominal Christians. Whereas now we get people who are totally outside of the church coming, and that's a much higher proportion of those. And then there's less of a dropout rate. I mean, in our group this time, no one has dropped out. We're on week 4 last week, but everyone was there by 7:32. There was, and a much higher attendance at the weekend, which we do in a day, and a huge openness. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that just right from the start, people saying, I'm here because of a broken relationship, or I'm here because I happened to watch one of the services online. The openness online is extraordinary. And I think it's something about it being maybe less threatening than being in a room with someone that you know that you can leave at any moment. There's an element of we've lost the meal together, but that's kind of replaced by the fact that right now I'm in your home and you're in my home. And that's true online. We're all in each other's homes. And there's something quite intimate about that. And then just extraordinary level of fascinating conversations that take place. And I just love it. It's so interesting. So I think, of course, we will go back to doing it in person, because there are some advantages of doing it in person. But I don't think we'll ever stop doing it online, because I think there are a whole load of people who would never come in person, but will come online. So I think we're only on week 4 of the course that we're doing right now, but still we're getting to know people. Each week, something comes out about someone's story, and you know a bit more about them. They reveal a bit more. As I've often said, we impress people with our strengths, but we connect with people through our vulnerabilities. And as people are vulnerable about what's really going on, about their fears, our addictions, our anxieties, we connect. And that is really powerful. And then you watch people finding the purpose of their lives, finding that they are loved. Everyone's looking for love. The first course we did online, someone said at the end of the course, I've been searching for love all my life, but I've been searching in the wrong places. I now realize I've been searching in impossible places. And then on the weekend, she experienced God's love being poured into her heart by the Holy Spirit. So you see people finding their purpose, you see people finding love, and you see people finding that sense of belonging, that there really is a group of people who don't judge them, encourage them, An alpha small group is a place where there's no judgment. People can say what they like. There's no confrontation. People are not attacked for having different views. Different views are welcomed. And people listen to each other with respect and encouragement. And that is quite rare in the world. The world today can be quite hostile. You only have to go on Twitter, see how sort of there's so much anger and even hatred. You come into an alpha small group, you find an atmosphere of love, encouragement, just very low key, non-confrontational, welcoming, where people can talk without being judged. And that is, just to watch that process is a huge privilege. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Well, Nikki, we're coming up to the early afternoon, and I know that you normally do your daily workout in the early afternoon. So thank you very much for speaking to me, and look forward to hearing about so many more people around the world doing Alpha and experiencing Jesus.
Oh, thanks, Isaac. It's so lovely to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. If this episode was inspiring, then please share the YouTube link with your church, your friends, or maybe even your neighbor. And if you have or know a powerful Alpha story, then please email us at globalstories@alpha.org. Join us for episode 2 as Nikki speaks with Justin about his encounter with Jesus through Alpha Online. See you soon. Peace.